This is the Core Outdoors Podcast, and I'm your host, Christian Rawls. This is the podcast for entrepreneurs in the outdoor industry. Whether you're a startup or a seasoned veteran, this show's mission is to deliver actionable insights and new perspectives from entrepreneurs working in the outdoor industry. This show is a production of Core, the Kootenay Outdoor Recreation Enterprise. Core is based in the Kootenay region of British Columbia and is a nonprofit grassroots organization dedicated to makers and creators in the outdoor industry. To learn more about Core, you can find a link to the website in the show notes. Before we jump into today's episode, I have one ask. Hit the follow or subscribe button on your podcast player. One small movement of your thumb makes a big difference in the growth of this show. If you'd like to get in touch and suggest a guest or give some feedback, you can email me at christian@coreoutdoors.org. Today's conversation is with Bill Amos, the founder and CEO of Northwest Alpine. Bill has been a vocal advocate for domestic manufacturing for the past 15 years and has lived the highs and lows of running an apparel factory in the U.S. Bill shares a background with other entrepreneurs in the outdoor industry that I'm always fascinated by. He went from Alpine climber to entrepreneur. As you'll hear in our conversation, Bill doesn't back down from a challenge and is committed to his convictions. Please enjoy my conversation with Bill Amos. What does learning how to ski in crappy Midwest conditions teach you about being a better skier?
Oh, man. I would say like some of the best skiers out there are from the Midwest. So I started skiing when I was like 11 on this little, it was like a ski hill in a resort community in Lisle, Illinois called Four Lakes that has like 3 rope tows and about 110 feet of elevation gain. So, and it's all ice all the time, basically. So I think when you're in like a sort of situation like that, the only thing you could do is really work on your technique and all that. So yeah, I think there's some really good skiers that come out of the Midwest. And then you go to after I graduated from high school, I ended up going to college in Colorado and then skied with a bunch of people that grew up there and everything. And no one could ski on ice at all. So it was pretty funny. Yeah.
Nice.
So I think it really helps with backcountry skiing also because you're skiing with variable conditions and all that. So I actually enjoy skiing on hard snow and ice and everything just because that's how I learned.
So that ties in nicely to my next question is that, so you moved out west and then you eventually got into alpine climbing. I think you were a self-proclaimed climbing bum there for quite a while. I have a theory about how alpine climbers end up being good entrepreneurs. There's a skill set that they develop and kind of a hardness that gets coated over them. I'm curious to hear what your perspective is on how your alpine climbing experience has kind of prepared you for entrepreneurship.
Yeah, I think it's kind of the ultimate preparation in a lot of ways because to be successful climbing mountains and stuff requires a real dogged determination and stubbornness that I think really translates well to entrepreneurship. I think that if you climb long enough, you usually have been put into situations where the consequences are pretty bad if you mess up or you're unlucky. And I think that's been a good preparation because I always think about, okay, like this right now, this business situation or whatever seems very tenuous and like it's difficult and trying and everything, but what are the consequences going to be? Is it going to be me losing my life? No. So really, like, I think puts things into perspective that you don't necessarily get in alpine climbing, puts things in perspective that you don't necessarily get in normal life. That makes sense.
Yeah. It's a crucible you have to kind of travel through to be able to experience the other side.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of climbers get really obsessed with the sport. It becomes sort of this one-track fixation. And at least that's what happened to me for most of my 20s. I think that for me, when I started Northwest Alpine, that kind of fixation transition to business. And when I was growing up, my mom always used to tell me I had a one-track mind because I would get fixated on these things. So like, that's all I could think about, all I wanted to do and all of that. And so I think that mindset's kind of a requirement for business also, because there's so many things that happen and problems to solve and all of that if you're not all in on it, you're not going to be successful probably.
Cool. So I want to transition into kind of the origin story of Northwest Alpine. So you've been working at the time you were working a little bit in the industry. I think you were working for Chilo Gear there in Oregon, and you took, from what I understand, you took a bit of a deep dive personally into the 2008 financial crisis, and you just researched it and were kind of drawn into it. And then somehow through that experience, you came out the other side and said, I want to start my own outdoor technical apparel brand. That's an interesting origin story. It may tie into your dogged fixation on the one-track mind concept. Yeah. I'm just curious how you turned from a hobby of interest of pursuing kind of the knowledge of the financial crisis into, I'm going to do something with this, and this is what it's going to be.
Yeah, I think that I just, again, got obsessed with understanding what was happening during the financial crisis, and wanted to done some like in undergrad and in graduate school, some taken economics classes, but I didn't fully understand it, and so I just got fascinated with it for whatever reason, and I came to the conclusion that our economy was kind of screwed if the whole thing was based on selling houses back and forth to each other, and that really a lack of manufacturing industry was going to be a problem for us in the future, because this was 2008, so it was 8 years after kind of the WTO free trade agreements, all that sort of stuff. So my dad was an entrepreneur, and he was in the food industry, and he did really well, but I saw like how hard he worked and the hours and the kind of sacrifice that it took for him to do what he did. I always said there's no way I'm ever gonna go into business for myself. It's too hard and too much. But during this whole trying to understand what's going on, I got interested in business also, and then in this manufacturing thing, saying, okay, like, what can I do that can support manufacturing here in this country? And most of my experience wasn't in business or manufacturing or anything really. It was in climbing. So I was like, well, okay, Portland's an apparel town. I see like that I think that there's products that are missing from the market that I'm interested in using myself, more technical apparel. And why can't I start a company making technical apparel and doing it in the US? And so that kind of started me on the path of Northwest Alpine. And so I'd done a little bit, like you mentioned, I worked at Chilo Gear for Graham up there. And so I had a little bit of exposure to cut and sew and all that sort of stuff, but really like a very kind of nascent understanding of what goes into it. So I feel like I was really coming into it with a naivete that I think if I had more experience and knowledge and understanding of what it was going to take to get where I wanted to go, that I probably never would have started. And I think so. I think there is definitely something to be said for that, but it's a hard way to do things, definitely.
Yeah, and at the time you chose not to necessarily just so you're going to launch a brand, a technical outdoor apparel brand, which I want to go back to that for a second. But for you, it wasn't just I'm going to make my stuff in the U.S. or have it made in the U.S. You literally said, I'm going to create the factory to make these things as well. Like that was the initial mission.
I had no idea what I was doing in the beginning. So I literally went on Craigslist and posted on Craigslist looking for somebody to help me make some apparel. And I had some wasn't thinking about like factory or anything like that at that point. So I had a couple of really weird meetings with people where it was like, yeah, I have no idea. It was Craigslist. So until I finally met a woman that had experience working for a women's athletic brand, and she was like legit and helped me kind of develop the first tech packs and for our first products, and then had actually, I don't even know how she found it, but found this tiny factory in Portland that was basically the upstairs of this house, and that's how we kind of created our first products. And I started my first goal was to make a pair of soft shell pants, and so ended up working with a siding factory and being like, okay, so we got enough fabric to make. So we had this awesome, also forgot we had this awesome resource in Portland called Rose City Textiles that they're a jobber, and so they got like mill ends and fabric overruns and stuff from other companies, a lot of like technical sort of stuff. And so I found some fabric there that I think was some Arc'teryx overrun stuff. It was really awesome. I wish after the problem with working with jobbers like that is that like once you buy the fabric, you can't get it again. They're just buying whatever overruns and stuff. So I was like, okay, we got enough fabric to make 100 pants. So we're going to make 100 pants, and then either I'm going to have climbing pants for the rest of my life, or we're going to sell them and see what happens. So did that. I think I like officially launched or incorporated the company in March of 2010, formed the LLC and all that. And then we launched those pants in September of 2010, and then got a website going, did all that, and then started selling products. And during that time, there was this kind of social media still wasn't what it is today. So forums were kind of big, and there was a really active forum. It's still around, but way smaller than it was then, called CascadeClimbers.com. And that's kind of where I started advertising or whatever, where our first customers came from. So they're real, like, obviously very niche climbing focused folks. So yeah, that was kind of the beginning. And it was never in the beginning, I don't think I had really thought about starting a factory, but it kind of became apparent after a year or two that working with small factory we were working with was not really gonna work. So was not gonna scale, I guess. So I ended up in my work meeting a woman who was based in Newberg, Oregon, which is southwest of Portland. And she had a decent sized factory in Newberg in the 80s and 90s. And they had done production for Columbia and Patagonia and Serac and like Spider, like every outdoor brand pretty much. And it was actually a pretty fascinating experience for me because she had like closed down her factory in the, I guess, early 2000s and had just taken everything she did throw away and put it into a container that sat on her friend's land for 10 or 12 years or whatever. And I had the opportunity to go with her to kind of clean it out. And it was like this time capsule of American manufacturing during that time, and going through it and finding trim from all these brands and labels and whatever from all these brands that used to produce in the US, but now wouldn't even think about it. It was a pretty eye-opening experience.
So for a guy like you who seems to like a challenge, alpine climbing, shitty skiing conditions in the Midwest, was that fuel in the fire when you saw like let's just call them the big players, and you're like, look, these guys left? Was that fuel for your fire to be like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to show it how it's done? Yeah. Or was it more daunting when you saw that?
No, I would say it was fuel for the fire. Like, what? It's like, why can't I do it? Like, everyone says that you can't, but like, I've been in these factories and I see people making stuff, and like, I know it's possible. So.
Okay. I want to hear a little bit about how you get into the factory and running your own factory for sure. But before that, I want to go back a little bit. You saw that there was some white space opening up. The bigger brands were leaving space for you to kind of hit the niche of kind of alpine climbing apparel, the technical alpine apparel. What was it like? What did you see specifically that they had left behind, or where were they not seeing? Like, what was the product that you were trying to serve your customers with? You're like, no, this is better. Was it just the fact that you were making it in North America, or is it the fact that, no, this is technically a better product and it just happens to be made in North America?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like equal parts both. I think you saw a shift away from these heritage climbing brands, historically made apparel for climbing and have some technical offerings and stuff, but that's not their focus at all, right? Because that's not where the market is, I guess. So the market has shifted more towards lifestyle apparel and all of that. So I felt like there was and even like, I think that some of the lifestyle feature stuff creeps into the technical side of things also. So like, I mean, we made pants without hand pockets. Like that sort of stuff that is very difficult to sell to people that aren't doing what you're doing. So like, really, I wanted to focus on stuff that was stripped down, really purpose built, and all that. And I think it's interesting. Like, I just saw recently, was thinking about this. The Patagonia just came out with their new like M10 shells, so pants and jackets, hard shells, everything. And I was looking at Colin Haley's blog. Colin's obviously like a legendary Pacific Northwest alpine climber, and he basically has a blog post that's begging people to buy the M10 because he's like, if you don't buy them, they're going to go away like in a season. And that kind of seems how it is with the big brands. If they don't, if this product could be awesome and great for what your core customer is, but if it doesn't meet their metrics for success, it's just going to go away.
You opened the door, so I'm going to walk through it. There was a time, I should preface this by saying, I don't think many of us would be here without the work of Patagonia in the past.
Yeah.
For sure. However, when they dropped Committed to the Core as their tagline, I remember seeing the new catalog that came out. I was like, where's Committed to the Core? What the hell? What just happened? And it was like, oh man, I had to pour one out on the curb for Patagonia. I was like, oh man, what a bummer. That being said, God bless. I love them. I still wear their stuff. But yeah.
No longer committed to the core.
Yeah. Committed to something for sure. Just doesn't have to be the core of alpine climbing. Okay, so I digress. I don't want to beat them up too much. So thinking about the product back then, but also now, I'm curious how you do it now. There's kind of the specialization of design versus the adaptability of design. And it looks like typically when you see something in the market, you're like, that looks like the adaptability of design as opposed to the specialization of design.
Yeah.
Technical pants without pockets seems like specialization of design. Are you still in that mindset of specialization of design, or have you had to like kind of broaden the scope a little bit to make it a bit more applicable? Like, in your experience, have you seen, I got to open it up a little bit more to have a broader market?
Yeah, our pants definitely have pockets now.
Oh, what a shame.
So have we
committed? Are you committed to the core?
We are no longer committed to the core. No. I think that there are some, I don't know the word I'm looking for, some decisions that you have to make that make a product more marketable. And if one of those is adding hand pockets, then so be it. I think that where we say we're focused on apparel for alpine sports and all that, but we did like a survey of our customers at the beginning of 2024, and almost everybody, the top thing they use our stuff for is hiking. Because I think that's what everybody just does, because it's easy to go out and trail and whatever. So I think that we are this specialized brand and everything. Like, I think that our products are usable for a wide array of outdoor activities. Or we might have things like longer arms for when you're reaching and whatever. So there are these kind of specific fit things and whatnot, but for the most part, I think people use our stuff for pretty much everything.
But sometimes it seems like, as it should be, maybe there's sometimes the specialization of marketing where it's like, oh, this is your ski kit, this is your alpine kit, this is your, whereas I just give me one. I just want one that works.
Yeah, totally.
I want the jack of all trades. So I think it's smart to make more adaptable choices in that design process.
Definitely. And I think that we don't want to, our line is pretty tight and for a variety of reasons, but we don't want to necessarily expand that. I think that having 1,200 SKUs or whatever is insane. So what product can we make that is going to serve our core customer, but also be able to be used by a wider range of people?
Yeah, I had Casey Shaw on the podcast not too long ago, and he was a designer at Arc'teryx in Patagonia. And he said something I liked, that it was, if you design for specifics, like a very specific thing, it can end up working well in more general things. But when you design for the generality, it doesn't end up working well for anything.
Yeah. Yeah. That was a great
So,
episode, by the way. I really enjoyed that.
well, all you have to do is plug a mic in and ask Casey one question, and you've got a good podcast. So I want to go back a little bit to kind of the idea of the factory. And so you're like, okay, well, for this thing to work, I need to have my own factory. I need to have more control over it. So you find some equipment, you start scaling up a factory. I can only imagine how challenging that could be to find not only the equipment, but the skilled workers to be able to work that equipment. And then you're making Northwest Alpine product in there, but then you also realize that, I could serve a whole nother market set by being that contract factory for other people. So what was that decision process like for you to say, I should open this up to other people? And then how did you balance those two things? Like, you're essentially running two businesses under one roof.
Yeah. So we had in, I guess, 2013, we had moved our factory out to Newburgh to be closer, or sorry, not our factory. We'd moved the business, Northwest Alpine, from Portland to Newburgh. And we had this idea that we got this kind of warehouse space. And the idea was that Cheryl, the woman who had the factory in Newburgh, bigger factory in Newburgh in the 80s and 90s, the idea was that she was going to build the factory side. We were going to build Northwest Alpine, and eventually, because she was older, that we were going to buy her out and take the factory over. So that was kind of the idea when we were starting. And so over like that year, pretty much kind of became apparent that she didn't necessarily have the desire, or I don't know, she was not able to kind of build the factory in the way that we had talked about. So I ended up making the decision, because we had been getting into some retailers and all that, and we were, really needed to ramp up our production. So during that year, I'd kind of been thinking about it and made the decision that I was just gonna start the factory, buy her equipment from her, and then go from there. So during that time, I'd also been meeting a lot of people that were looking for sewing and someone that could sew technical fabrics and whatnot, and we're having trouble finding it. So I felt like there was a market opportunity there for sure, and was kind of like, well, let's just do it and see what happens. So I officially started, I guess, the manufacturing side as another company in late 2014, and called that company Kachatna Apparel Manufacturing. And I think we started, Cheryl had like one woman working for her who had worked for her for a long time, Lupe, who's amazing. She's like the best. She became like our sample maker and is just super skilled. So she was there, and then we ended up hiring 3 more people and started, and boy, was that an eye-opening experience when all of a sudden you have apparel with 4 or 5 people on it and no idea what you're doing. So
did you have to kind of let off the gas in Northwest Alpine to grow Kachatna to kind of essentially pay the overhead and pay the bills? Is that how it worked? Is like Kachatna kind of became the cash maker while Northwest Alpine did it kind of go to the side? Did it kind of become the hobby in that way?
Yeah, absolutely. So it quickly became apparent that we were going to have to find some significant volume to sew to make this work. So I really started trying to find more and more people looking for sewing and doing sales for KM. Meanwhile, like, we're trying to sell Northwest Alpine and do that, but our volume was like nowhere near enough to support a factory at that point. So yeah, we ended up really like, I think I'd also have this like notion that we could support the factory. A lot of the work that we were getting is short run, fairly technical stuff. And it pretty quickly became apparent that we were not going to be able to survive doing that. So if you're doing less than 500 units of something, especially if it's difficult and technical, without charging, like pricing yourself out of the market, or there's no way to to make money doing that. So yeah, we started trying to find kind of bigger. God, we did production for a lot of companies in the beginning. Like actually Cotopaxi was one of our first customers. We made their first apparel, and then a bunch of smaller brands. And eventually, like what really made the factory go off, we just started, I don't even know how she found us, but we started working with a woman who had started a women's athletic brand out of Texas. And she had just gotten into kind of the CrossFit women's Olympic lifting space and had done a really good job with Instagram early when it was still possible to build a big organic audience without a lot of money. And she just crushed it. Like we started with her making her big product was booty shorts basically. And we started with her making like pairs a month. And then it was just every month it grew and grew. And then within a year, we were making 12,000 pairs of shorts a month for her. And it was, that was a wild time. We were like figuring out how to scale to that volume of production. And it was awesome. It was fun because we were making good money and things were going in the right direction and all that. So really during that time, it was definitely my dreams of growing Northwest Alpine were put on hold while we were doing that.
And how did that feel? You were not interested in going into business originally. Then you go into business to do your passion project, and then your passion project turns into essentially a behemoth, but it's not necessarily what you got into it for. What did it feel like to kind of have riding a rocket ship that looked successful and felt successful, but it wasn't the thing you wanted to do? What was that? What did that feel like during that time?
I mean, I think it felt pretty good because we've been definitely like the first year of the factory was a super big struggle, and always like, are we going to make payroll or not make payroll? Like how much longer can we do this without something breaking? And so once we started having that success with this brand, it felt really good. And I was really going from my like lack of experience with manufacturing to owning a factory, but not knowing what I was doing. But then to like learning everything that goes into apparel manufacturing, it was like, it was fulfilling for me. I think it's fulfilled that like my natural curiosity and interest in understanding how things work and all of that. So I was definitely like, we were still doing Northwest Alpine stuff. It was small, very small to a small degree and everything. And yeah, I think that like in hindsight, looking back, like, I guess I don't know if this is going to get too deep into this part, but I got pretty freaked out during this time also because so much of our business was reliant on one customer. So I felt like we were always, I don't think there was any, especially in hindsight, that there was any risk that they were going away. But I felt that like acutely that if this business goes away, we're done. And so I feel like during that time, we were always trying to find another brand that was on a rocket ship like them. And so we kind of wasted a lot of time working with projects that weren't necessarily going in that direction and all of that. When in hindsight, I wish we would have just done their production and then worked on growing Northwest Alpine. But, hindsight's 2020, obviously.
Right. So that leads to, fast forwarding a little bit, Kachana is really successful. You get into COVID, you really start to scale up, and then things took a kind of a big sudden turn for you. And so can you walk us through that story and kind of where that leaves you today?
Yeah. So in 2018, in Newburgh, we had our original space we were in. Then we'd grown into a second space where we moved cutting to, and that was across the parking lot. So being in two buildings, even if they're close together, is kind of a big pain in the ass. So we ended up looking for a new space. And at the same time, like most of our employees were actually commuting to Newburgh from Salem, Oregon, which is about 45 minutes away. So when we were looking for a new space, we started looking around Salem because it just seemed to make more sense. There's more of a workforce there and more commercial real estate. It's just a bigger city. So I ended up buying a building here in 2018 here in Salem and then moving the factory. That was quite the experience. So we shut down our production in Newburgh on Friday, and then we're up and running in Salem on Monday. So we moved, at that point, probably had like 60 sewing machines, cutting tables, laser cutter, everything. So that's probably one of the hardest things I've ever done that weekend. But it was like a big sense of accomplishment when we were up and running on Monday. Yeah, that was pretty crazy. So we had this new 20,000 square foot space going from like 5,000 square feet. And we're kind of rolling along. We'd gotten another big customer, and so we were doing pretty well there and getting settled in. And then, of course, COVID hit, and I guess it was really March of 2020. We ended up having, I think by that time we probably had like 40 employees or something like that, and we ended up having everyone's sales tanked, right? No one knew what was going on. So everybody canceled their April POs. So we're sitting here like middle of March, and we have our 40 employees or whatever. And then we have $250,000 worth of POs canceled and no idea what we're going to do after that. But almost immediately we started getting requests for masks and gowns, PPE stuff. So we went from like, what are we going to do? We're probably going to have to shut down or something, I don't know, to having like our best month ever from like a net income perspective in April of 2020, because we just shifted immediately and cranked out thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of masks and started working with the local hospital system here for gowns, and that kind of started us on the PPE journey.
And so when did that end? What was it like, and when did you have to kind of shift out of Kachatna?
Yeah, so let's see. We ended up getting a pretty big contract with a hospital system out of Arizona to make reusable isolation gowns, and that was kind of like, we really ramped up for that. We bought new automated cutting table, more equipment, hired more people, paid to train more people, all that stuff. And actually, so when we moved into our new building, we had a tenant in half of it, and then we were in the other half. And basically, I negotiated with them for them to leave, basically, so that we could expand. So now we had more overhead in our building. And we'd hired, I think, like at our peak PPE production, we had about 75 people sewing. So it was a fairly sizable operation. And I guess it was really early 2021, it started to become apparent that these long-term contracts were not going to be so long-term. So I ended up kind of in this scramble trying to find more work. And we were working on this potential military PPE project and a bunch of other stuff that didn't end up coming to fruition, basically. So we're also in this like weird time when it was impossible to find people to work, basically. So I had this real fear that if we let people go, that we were never going to get them to come back. So I was really reluctant to lay people off, which was a mistake ultimately. So we ended up burning a ton of cash during that time trying to keep things going and everything. And I was definitely way too slow to right size our workforce, and was maybe relying a little too much on hope and that I was going to be able to turn things around. So I guess it was really end of 2021 that we really started to things started to kind of right size, and we started to get back to like our core customers. And we were doing Northwest Alpine we were doing pretty well. I had hired a sales manager in early 2021 also because he felt there was a market opportunity to try and fill some of the lack of product that retailers were experiencing during that time. And so it was like trying to build Northwest Alpine at the same time, was trying to keep the factory running, and kind of that balance was really difficult to strike, I think. So we ended up having, in addition to Northwest Alpine, I think we had about 3 customers that were the core of our business. And we kind of later in 2022. So we'd been doing okay during that whole time. And then later in 2022, REI ended up having issues with their distribution center. And REI was the main customer of one of those 3 customers. And REI canceled all of their POs for, I think, like every brand at that point while they were trying to figure out their distribution center stuff. And this brand canceled all their POs for us. And then that was kind of like okay, I don't know how we're going to recover from this at this point. And so decided to make the decision to shut down the factory. And that would have been September of 2022.
Wow. And so you shut down the factory, and then you just turn your focus. Okay, I'm just focusing on Northwest Alpine. Is that the plan?
Yeah. So shutting down the factory was like a whole job in itself, because we owned the real estate, probably had 90 something machines, sewing machines, and then we had cutting tables, and we had all the equipment, tons of equipment. So I had to like go about, basically, we laid everybody off. Luckily, everybody got jobs, because sewing jobs were in demand at that point. So we helped everybody find work, which was great. Like, that, as hard as that was, I'm just glad that almost everybody that wanted a job was able to find one pretty quickly. And then I kind of went about, my dad came and stayed with us for 6 months, 7 months, and helped me kind of wrap things up. So that was a huge process and slightly traumatic process.
I can imagine. Just
dealing with all that, and dealing with the bank, and dealing with having to sell the real estate, sell everything. It was just a mess. And it took me about a year basically to wrap everything up. And so during that time, I was also still trying to run Northwest Alpine, make things work, transition our production to other factories, and do all that work as well. So really, like, from the time we shut down to the time, like, I feel like the factory stuff there's still stuff that is not done yet, but for the most part done, was about a year. So we were wrapped up in October of last year, of 23. So really, like, it's been about a year of focusing just on Northwest Alpine stuff.
That I can imagine that was, like you mentioned, a traumatic experience, growing this thing to such a large size, and then having to shut it down. With a year behind you now and some reflection time, what have you learned as an entrepreneur from that? I mean, I know you've learned. I assume you've learned a lot. Pick kind of the high level stuff. What have you learned the most from that process that you're taking with you now into your time of kind of regrowing Northwest Alpine up as your sole project?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like, I had a really, like, a mindset that was during the factory time that was really focused on just growing bigger and growing our revenue, and not as much focus on, okay, are we taking on the right projects at the right time with the right partners? Is this going to be profitable for us? I think it's easy to get, like, stuck in a mindset of, like, watching the big top line number go up and being like, oh, this is awesome. Like, I guess that revenue is a vanity metric sort of thing. But I was definitely stuck in that. And I think I think back now about the things that I would have done about focusing on, like, the projects that we had and the customers that we had that were most profitable. And if we had just done that, stuck with them, my situation would be very different than it is now. But I think that's, I don't know, I think that's maybe something that I had to go through in order to get where I am now also, I guess. That makes sense.
Yeah, I completely understand. And thanks for the candor. I appreciate you being honest. I mean, these are the conversations that I like to have, because, quite frankly, it's the conversations that don't get spoken about. because people look at it as like a failure as opposed to a learning experience. So it's great. Like, let's turn now and look at Northwest Alpine. Like you put all your energy now into this. So you're still making everything domestically. You're just not running that factory for yourself.
Correct.
You're running both a wholesale channel and a direct to consumer channel through Northwest Alpine. I want to talk about both of those things, but like first let's get into the wholesale channel. So how do you grow a wholesale sales channel as a niche outdoor brand? What has been your experience? What have you been successful with so far? Do you use independent sales reps? Do you use it all in-house? Are you hitting the road and doing product knowledge clinics in stores? Like, kind of tell me about what your strategy is around growing Northwest Alpine as a niche brand.
Yeah, that's a good question. So like I mentioned, in 2021, we'd hired sales manager who had not was a buyer for a really good specialty store and had a lot of experience on the retail side. And so he kind of identified this need and taught us about it. And so we did a real big push into wholesale, and that would have been starting in the early 2021 timeframe. And I think that a lot of the strategy there was trying to get product, because everything was like on allocation at that point and stores couldn't get stuff. And so trying to get our product into stores that needed it were having trouble with their supply. And ultimately, I don't think that was like the best strategy. I think that we ended up kind of having issues ourselves with delivery, and because we were dealing with the factory stuff, and it's like, okay, well, we need to focus on making Northwest Alpine stuff now, but we have like no cash at the moment because this contract stuff's not working. So it was just a total mess at that point, pretty much. So our wholesale stuff kind of started to fall apart a little bit. We had started to work with a couple different rep groups also, and just kind of quickly became evident that what we were doing was not going to work. And I think that when the sort of scarcity of product turned into a glut that the industry has been working through, that kind of killed most of the wholesale channel for us, except for a few like really core stores. And so I think now our strategy is we went from having about, I don't know, like 50 dealers to now we have a handful, 4 or 5 that are pretty core, is going to be working with those guys that have been with us the whole time. And they tend to be more either technical shops like the Mountaineer and Key Valley, New York, that sell a lot of stuff to climbers. So that really fit in with what we're trying to do. Or they're just super passionate about what we're doing and about domestic manufacturing and making things in America and all of that. And so those are kind of the stores that we're trying to go after now. And I would say that like in that 2021, 2022, beginning of 2023 time period, probably 60% of our sales were to wholesale, and now it's probably 10%, something like that. So definitely more focused on DTC at the moment.
So with e-commerce, then I guess it's the same question, but at a different sales channel. What's your strategy for growing a niche outdoor apparel brand on a direct-to-consumer level?
Yeah, so we're just working on most of what we focus on is social media stuff. So trying to grow our organic Instagram organically more, and then doing more paid ads on Meta, which is terrible. I like right now I see it as a necessary evil. Like I would much rather that we be selling in wholesale than giving as much money as we are to Mark Zuckerberg. Like I don't think that our values align with Mark as nearly as much as they do with independent specialty retail. So trying to figure out how we can do better job getting into more dealers, I think, is something that we want to focus on.
Yeah, I mean, that is something that happens with younger brands or brands in general when they're thinking, well, I'm not sacrificing the margin for wholesale, but the margin is higher for e-commerce, but
But is it?
Yeah, there is what I call the meta toll booth that you have to pay typically, unless you have some really good organic marketing skills, which people have for sure. And there's some really interesting things that people are doing with micro influencers and all sorts of different things to kind of avoid paying that toll booth. But it's expensive to go direct to consumer, right? To be able to make loud enough noise for people to hear you.
Absolutely.
So we're coming out right now. We're recording this. We're just a week before Christmas, and we're kind of coming out of this like hyper sales promotion era where, like I was joking, that Black Friday seemed to have lasted 2 months this year. What's your perspective on selling, like, the discounting, the selling off price to drive sales versus balancing that relationship with your wholesalers? I mean, yes, you only have a few wholesalers at retail accounts at the moment, but as that grows, like I'm always interested to hear people's perspective on how you balance that kind of conundrum where you don't want to necessarily compete off price with those accounts that you're trying to grow. So how do you look at that?
Yeah, I think part of our whole deal and part of what I've wanted to always do is prove that we can have a viable business making things in the U.S. and that we can be priced comparably to import apparel. So if you look at our pricing, it's comparable to Patagonia and sometimes cheaper. So we don't have the margin to discount. Like we have to sell. I don't have specifics, but we have to sell a certain percentage of what we do at full price or we're not going to make it. We don't want to have more than a Black Friday sale and then maybe one other sale during the year and then be full price the rest of the year. And we pretty much have to. So it's not really like.
Out of curiosity, did you see success with discount with a Black Friday promotion? Did you get a bump?
Oh yeah, this is the first year that we've ever actually done anything like for Black Friday, and now we put ad spend behind it and all that sort of stuff, and we did well. In some ways it sucks, but in some ways it's definitely set us up to have a better 2025 than I think we would have if we didn't. So
right, oh, good for you. It seems like there is a growing sentiment in the outdoor industry that's against the big publicly traded brands and the PE, the private equity owned brands that are kind of seems like almost everywhere at the moment. This seems like an opportunity for challenger brands like Northwest Alpine. And what do you think the future looks like for brands like Northwest Alpine and other challenger brands in the industry? And how should we be approaching this, let's call it just general sentiment?
I think that there's a kind of broader sentiment growing against large companies and corporations. Like there's this maybe an awareness that the way that that our economy has been structured and that we've been doing things for the last 30 years has not been good for the majority of our citizens, and that something has to change. And that's what we're really trying to lead to, right? Like I talk about this a lot when we think about these companies got big because of globalization, basically, right? When they gained access to global labor markets and moved to take advantage of cheap labor, that structurally changed how our economy works for most people. So it used to be that when you were manufacturing things here, you have the cost of goods sold for labor and materials. And I've been thinking about it like this, basically, like part of that cost of goods sold for labor, that went to like people in your country. And that was the piece of the product that was theirs, of the profit that was theirs. And when you move that production, you took it away. And now part of that goes overseas to wherever. And then those companies kept the rest of it, right? They didn't lower the prices when their labor got cheaper. They just kept it for themselves. And that's kind of like that ultimate like question of how much goes to labor and how much goes to capital. And I think that like, so what I guess these big brands are basically, it's like hoarding wealth. And like our income inequality is at a level now that it hasn't been since the Gilded Age, as worse than during the Gilded Age. So you can't like continue to kind of turn the screws on everybody and not expect something bad to happen. And I think maybe we saw that a couple weeks ago with the United Healthcare CEO guy. There's this rising sort of class consciousness in this country that's happening now. I don't know. I think that maybe I'm getting a little bit off of
That's good. Go for
the
it.
original question. I think that opens up a lot of opportunity for small companies, because I think it's actually like I'm like very pro capitalism markets, and I think that it's the best system for allocating resources to people. But what we have right now is not a good version of that. And I think like kind of the most revolutionary thing you can do if you're worried about these things is start buying stuff from small companies like ours. Because when you do, all of your money is staying here and it's going into your community in the form of like probably the most, thing I'm most proud of about what we did at the factory. It was just how much money we were paying, millions of dollars in wages, and that was going into the community. And that's a real economic impact that is happening there. I think that we need more of that, because that's how you grow. That's how you grow the labor share of value.
Lived it, having ridden the roller coaster of having our own factory and now working with other domestic manufacturers. Do you see this as do you still believe it to be a viable future? And if so, what needs to happen to make it viable? Like what needs to happen?
Oh, I don't only think it's viable. I think it's the only way that we're going to get through all of this. So I think that really like what opened my eyes during like the PPE thing, let's go back to that real quick, because that was an essential product that we had basically moved all the production of to China, and they had done everything to subsidize their industry. They gave free land, free whatever, everything to dominate that industry, and they did. And then they said, overnight, we are no longer exporting this stuff to you. We need it all for ourselves. You can no longer have it. And then we had doctors and the wealthiest nation in the history of the world wearing garbage bags. And it took companies like ours, it was awesome during that time, because every company that sewed, it seems, switched on a dime and pivoted to making PPE. And so we had this like burgeoning industry. And sorry, I'm getting a little sidetracked, a little off track, but basically, like, I guess my point is that like there are certain products that we need for our society to function and to run. And if we can't get those from China or from wherever they're being made, then what are we going to do? Like we are not the only factory that went out of business because of PPE and lack of support. Like so many factories, so many mills. It's bad. And we're actually in a worse position now than we were before COVID. That like, if that were to happen again, I don't know who, like everybody that got burned, everybody that knows it, no one's going to go back and invest in that kind of manufacturing now.
With that being said, do you think the future is bright for domestic American-made manufacturing?
Absolutely. I think, yeah, I'm very bullish on it, because I think that it's been rough. The last year and a half has been really rough. So many factories have closed down. It's been really bad. And I think that is a post-COVID sort of effect there. But I think that as we continue to see geopolitical instability, trade wars, tariffs, climate-related disasters, like look at the Red Sea is still closed. The Suez Canal is still closed. Shipping and boats are going around Africa because Houthis are launching rockets at them. And we have the most expensive military in the world, but we're not able to stop that from happening. And historically, it's been the Navy's role to keep trade lanes open and all of that. And we can't do it because we don't have the resources to, nor should we. I don't know. So I think it's just going to get more and more expensive to do business overseas. And I think there's been a lot of unrest in Bangladesh and political instability there. And obviously they're a huge apparel exporter and other places. I think unless something happens where all of a sudden we have peace and we've solved climate change and we've done all that, then I think that the ability to make things closer to home is going to be super important, continue to be super important.
So you've owned a domestic factory. Would you open another one?
I get asked this fairly often, and
really?
I always say my wife would kill me if I brought that up, probably. So no, I would, depending on the circumstances, but not with my own capital.
Okay.
Yeah. Shifting
gears a little bit. You are definitely drawn to hard things, and you mentioned curiosity. I think you're a naturally curious person. You follow that curiosity, whether it's learning to ski on shitty conditions or hard alpine climbing, running your own factory. What draws you to that? Is it just the natural curiosity, or, sorry to be so blunt, but do you like to suffer?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. I think that's one of the keys to successful alpine climbing is ability to suffer and then forget about it when you get back and then go do it again.
And then want to go do it again.
I don't know what's wrong with me, but I don't know if it's a feature or bug or what, but I don't know that I could be satisfied in my life if I wasn't challenging myself in significant ways, I guess.
I agree. I think it's great. You're principled. You're driven. I mean, let's look back at the origin story. You took a deep dive into what got us into the economic mess of 2008, and you said, "Oh, we need to change things." And so, instead of voting or complaining or going online and ranting, you said, "I'm gonna open a brand. I'm gonna open a factory. I'm gonna do this myself." So that's commendable. And so, if it's a feature or a bug, I would say it's a feature. I appreciate it, and people listening appreciate that you're willing to literally put your money where your mouth is. And that's rare. So I commend you on that.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So in the last few questions here, just want to wrap it up. Curious what you think won't change within the outdoor industry in the next 5 to 10 years.
Oh, that's a tough question I've been thinking about quite a bit. And I think what won't change? People are still going to go outside and recreate no matter what, right? Climbing has been a sport arguably since the first ascent of Mont Blanc in 1789 or around then. And I think that a lot has happened since 1789. I mean, there's always been people climbing mountains, and the outdoors has always been a refuge for people. And I think that's the only thing I know. I think there's going to be monumental changes in the industry, and not just in the outdoor industry, but just generally. And I have no idea what's going to happen. Okay. But
all right, that's the beauty of it. People are still going to go outside, and that's quite frankly what they should be doing. So
absolutely.
I'm glad to hear it. What skills would you recommend a new founder learn before getting their start?
I don't know. I think you just have to start first, and then what you need to learn comes to you. So okay. Thinking about that, I know way more about septic systems than I ever thought I would know. So because of our old building being on septic, so I had to go do deep dive research into septic systems because we had a disaster, and then that got me into composting toilet systems and putting in. So we actually put in the first commercial composting toilet system in Oregon. I think a very few of those around. So basically, I think the entrepreneurial journey takes you in places that you never would imagine going, and really you just have to bring there's no class or anything you can take to do it. You just need to bring your curiosity and your ability or willingness to suffer and just do it.
Maybe bring some problem-solving skills.
Absolutely. Yes.
Great. The question I end with everybody is, how do you define success for yourself?
Good question. I mean, I think as long as I'm feeling challenged and feel like I'm doing the right thing, I guess like that feels successful to me. Like, I don't think you could put, to me, but like financial stuff and money is not super important. Like, obviously it's important to a degree, but that doesn't drive what I want to do. I think like, I don't see our having to close the factory as a failure, really. I mean, I see it as such a like giant learning experience. And so, I mean, yeah, I don't know. I think just that like, yeah, as long as I'm still curious and still working as hard as I can to make things that I want to do happen, then that to me is plenty.
Great. Well, I wish you more of that then.
Thank you.
So where can people find more about Northwest Alpine? I actually, one last question. I think we're around the same age. So every time I see NW Alpine, I'm sorry, I just think about NWA.
Yeah.
Was there ever a moment where you're like, I'm going to make this brand called NWA?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, that's definitely a factor in deciding. I decided on the name for sure.
Okay,
definitely
cool.
the NWA fan.
Okay, good. I'd sense that. So where can people learn more about NWA? Where should they go?
Yeah, check out our website, nwalpine.com. Follow us on Instagram, which is NW Alpine Gear. We post a lot of content there. And then we started doing some longer form stuff on YouTube as well. Nice. So we have a tiny following there. So if anyone wants
start going, grow it. Let's grow this thing.
Wants to follow us
awesome.
there. We kind of talk about try and get more in depth in what we're doing and all of that. So
awesome. Yeah. All right. Well, everybody check it out. Bill, thanks so much for your time. It's good to get to know you a little bit more here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. This is great.
Thanks so much for listening all the way to the end of this podcast. If you enjoyed it, please share it with a friend you think may enjoy it too. You could also take a few seconds to subscribe to the podcast. Anything you do to help share the love here, we'd appreciate it. Thanks so much for following along, and we'll see you next time.